Welcome my friends once again to Short Story Theatre. This is the third and final installment of Bill Russo's book, Hauntin Taunton, The State Asylum. It is also the 39th and final episode of Season 1 of our little experimental audio project, of the Little Theatre, in the alley just behind Main Street. I'm your host Basil Nightingale. Let's recap what has happened so far. A retired geography teacher, James Wilkes began experiencing bad dreams, which became nightmares so ferocious he was nearly frightened to death. His screams in the middle of the night were so loud and mournful, that his neighbors called the authorities. He was bound to a gurney, and dragged off, under the twilight of a full moon, and committed to the Taunton State Hospital, for the criminally insane. His crime, for which he might be committed to the asylum for life, was disturbing the peace. The most notorious criminal, in the hospital, when Wilkes was admitted, was Annabelle Parsons, a cannibal woman who murdered and ate dozens of New Englanders, and delighted in feasting upon the bodies of her victims. She especially relished saving a few pieces of her kills for future dining, so she began pickling and canning their fingers and toes. After her capture, a newspaperman came up with a new name for Annabelle. From then on she was known as Cannibelle. After she bit off pieces of several nurses and orderlies, Cannibelle was fitted with an iron mask that had slits for her eyes and a tiny straw-sized hole through which she could eat only a liquid diet. The beast of James Wilkes' dreams transformed itself from a nightmare form to a flesh and blood wall walker, who sliced up Cannibelle in the same manner as she herself had carved up her victims. Later, a new menace came to the hospital. It was a woman named Poison Ivy, the hug and drug killer. She held the record as the most prolific mass murderer the world has ever seen. In this episode we will find out what the wall-walking monster has in mind for her. We also will learn how, and why, James Wilkes dreamed up the wall-walking, steel-clawed monster, and why the beast was Hauntin Taunton. Now let's join our narrator. Here's Short Story Theatre's Matthew Larbook.
Thanks Basil. As our story resumes, James Wilkes has just left his latest session with his new doctor. He informed Dr. Starling about the Mexican trip that may have led to the beginnings of his nightmares. The doctor told him about the newest, infamous murderer in the asylum, known as Poison Ivy. As he went to dinner he noticed that in the dining hall that night, the buzz at all the tables was about her. She held the world record for the most murders. But because she was not violent and had been a model patient since her admission, she was allowed to participate in various activities, including meal times and recreational periods. Ivy sat alone at a table, daintily eating her food. Her reputation was such that nobody was willing to sit with her. Nearly every other inmate stared, wondering how such a harmless-looking woman could be responsible for so many deaths. Though her appearance was calm and her looks were fair, the other patients, and the staff too, were unsettled, even fearful. Midway through the meal, a few asylum wits whipped up a poem about Ivy and first whispered it, and soon chanted it aloud.
Beware of the asylum called Taunton State, and its most dangerous and feared inmate. Poison Ivy is pretty and just as cute as a bug, but she'll kill you dead with a hug and a drug.
Happily chanting along with it, Ivy smiled and seemed to wholly enjoy having a rhyme made about her, but the majority of the patients were in a near panic. She's probably put arsenic in our food. Somebody wailed, prompting a dozen or more patients to throw their plates directly at Ivy, who ducked under the table. Soon the entire dining hall was in an uproar. Tables were knocked over. Fights broke out, people ran over each other trying to get out of the hall. It took the orderlies and security staff an hour to get the ruckus sorted out. 8 people were injured and sent to the infirmary. Most patients were put back in their rooms, with their doors locked from the outside. A few were restrained in straitjackets, some were forced into padded cells, and several particularly violent inmates were banished to the clammy basement where they were chained to the walls. Of the hundreds of patients and staff, only Ivy seemed undisturbed by the melee. Gaining satisfaction from her celebrity, she was willingly led to her room where she stripped off her clothes and went to bed. Quickly falling asleep with a smile on her face, she looked more like Virgin Mary the Madonna than the mad drugger the newspapers called her. Ivy dreamed a sweet reverie in which she was the head nurse at the world's largest hospital. Sick and dying patients pleaded with her for a hug and she happily complied. Ivy dreamed that all of her charges died in a state of euphoria while she snuggled with them in their beds, a morphine drip tied above their heads. Jim Wilkes also dreamed that night, his first nightmare in months. It began with the dim vision of a circle of fire above his head that split into twin discs of searing, yellow flame. The spheres developed blossoming red spots in the middle that transformed into tiny oceans of boiling blood, giving them the appearance of eyes set ablaze by Satan himself. A wispy, dark cloud surrounding the devil eyes gradually assumed the shape of a face. The face, if it could be called that, was a grotesque lump of pseudo-flesh. Its burning eyes were perched above a black mask of rubber, or possibly metal, that shrouded its mouth and nose. Jim Wilkes wasn't certain the beast even possessed those features, because when it spoke, the sound surged from the boiling eye sockets and floated out on a spray of foul-smelling, boiling blood drops. Jim Wilkes looked to see if his roommate was awake. Captain Sumner was sleeping soundly, and didn't stir, not even when the beast spoke. Its words flew at Wilkes, streaming from the eyes of fire along a path of a foul-smelling, spurt of bloody bubbles. Not you. Narg, no, Narger, never, never you. Rising to the ceiling, the unholy fiend, fly walked upside down to the wall where it started to fade in and out, almost completely dissolving, before walking through the solid wall to the interior hallway. Making no attempt to hide itself, the creature darted in and out of the walls, walking upon the ceiling of nearly every room on the second floor of the Sour Wing. From the nursing and housekeeping stations, it took a number of items, placing them in a white cloth sack. The beast resumed its check of patients' quarters, until it arrived in room 289, a private room housing just one inmate, Poison Ivy. The seething fires in the monster's eyes gentled down to flames as calm as a single candle. The devil eyes fixed upon the sleeping form of the beautiful young woman. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with long, jet-black hair, and a complexion the color of writing paper. Full-figured and healthy-looking, she was sleeping soundly, a smile on her face. The beast scampered down the wall and crept silently to the bedside. With amazing dexterity it used its claws to scissor off a portion of the sheet covering Ivy. It repeated the procedure, slicing off a second section. With the skill of a surgeon, the monster used one piece of the sheet to fashion a tight, nearly soundproof gag on Ivy's mouth. He wrapped the second piece securely around her head, to serve as a blindfold. The creature pulled back the sheet, and stuffed it into the cloth bag, exposing the woman's naked body. So delicate was the touch of the fiend, that Ivy never stirred, not until she heard the sound of a man's voice. It was a wonderful voice, as good as a movie star's. At first she thought it was all part of her lovely dream, but panic set in when she realized she was blindfolded and couldn't see, and was gagged so that she could not scream. Just lie still and don't fuss, dear. I have a surprise for you. Don't move. This will be the highlight of your life, said the voice, sounding much like Alan Ladd, star of many films of the 1900s, including Shane, the ultimate American Western movie. Ivy pondered her situation and started to calm down. Becoming increasingly aroused by what she thought might turn out to be a romantic encounter, she relaxed and waited for the handsome man to make his move. The beast opened the white cloth bag and withdrew a tripod with metal legs and set it on the floor. Reaching in the bag again, it took out a drip bag, tubing, and a bottle of 800 milligrams of morphine. Filling the drip bag from the bottle, the thing with the eyes of the devil, draped it over the arm at the top of the tripod and took a needle from the cloth sack. Ivy felt the mattress sag under a new weight. He was getting into bed with her. She felt his caress on her shoulder. Her breathing quickened as his touch moved down her arm. Lie still, dear, I'm going to give you something to make you feel better, said the deep, clear voice that Ivy was certain belonged to a handsome, rugged man. The movie star man put his arms around Ivy and held her tight. Relax, dear. Tonight you're going to have the most thrilling experience of your life. She felt the stab of a needle in her arm. That didn't hurt, did it, dear? I'm going to hug you now so that you'll be nice and warm. Within seconds the first effect of the morphine hit Ivy and she writhed in agony. Spasms rocked her body. Her back arched as she convulsed and fell unconscious. The monster released his grip and quickly turned off the morphine drip. He spent 20 minutes reviving Ivy. When he was certain that she was aware of what was happening, he spoke again.
You're back, dear. You're back. I was afraid you left me. It's too soon. I want you to suffer much more before you die.
The beast choked out the words as his voice changed from sounding like the radio and movie star Alan Ladd, to a guttural, beastly growl. Getting up to readjust the drips, the thing reopened the flow of the secondary bag. Once again Ivy's body reacted violently. Her last thoughts before she died were about the irony of it all. She had given a wonderful peaceful death to 100 people by hug and drug. Now a man with the voice of a film star was killing her with hug and drug, but she couldn't enjoy it. She didn't know it before, but was finding out that she was allergic to morphine. Poison Ivy was found dead in her room the following morning. An empty IV bag was hanging from a tripod next to her bed. There was no sign of forced entry, her door was still locked, and there was no indication of a struggle or foul play. The local police ruled that Ivy committed suicide, taking her own life, by the same means she used in the murders of 100 people or more. The authorities discounted the reports of dozens of patients who claimed to have seen the wall walker of Taunton State in their rooms or in the hallways. The chief of police summed up the death and the wall walker sightings in his official report. He said, "Nearly every inmate on the second floor of the Sauer building claims to have seen a creature fly walking on their ceilings and walls on the same night as Ivy Sutton's death. Even if they did see such a beast, they all agree that it caused them no harm, merely watching them for a moment, and then fading in and out before disappearing through a solid wall." The hospital staff confirms that most of the patients in the institution are delusional, which is one of the reasons for their incarceration. In conclusion, said the Taunton chief of police, Ivy Sutter gave herself a taste of her own medicine. Death by suicide. Case closed. I had the nightmare again. It was the same night that Poison Ivy was killed, Jim Wilkes told Dr. Starling, at their next session a few days after Ivy was found dead in her bed. The police said that she committed suicide, Jim. But you and I know better, Doc. The wall walker, the monster from my nightmares, killed her, and Cannibal too. I didn't want to believe it, but I have to face up to it. Somehow the monster of my dreams is real, and is connected to me. Maybe I'm responsible for the deaths. Wilkes told the doctor every detail of his nightmare, including what the monster told him. Not you, never you. The doctor nodded his head and said, I agree with you that somehow the beast is bonded to you, Jim, but we have to find out why. Do you have any idea? Yes, it's the Mexican trip I told you about. There's more to the story. As your notes will remind you, I was in the city of Agua Prieta in late October. Jose, the man who became my friend and guide, told me about a fascinating national holiday celebrated in Mexico, around the time of Halloween. It's called El Día de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. It's a celebration that to an outsider might seem like Halloween, because there are ghostly and ghastly costumes involved, as well as candy and food. But the differences between Halloween and the Día de los Muertos are as vast as the disparity between a hill and a mountain range. In Mexico, the Day of the Dead is a 3-day celebration, involving everyone in the community, not just children on a treasure hunt for candy. The festivities begin at sunset on All Hallows Eve, October 31st, when children fashion altars in their homes to invite the angelitos, little angels, children who have died, to come back to life and visit them on the second full day, November 2nd, All Saints' Day. On the third day, All Souls' Day, November 3rd, the dead adults are encouraged to emerge from their graves and spend a pleasant 24 hours among the living. Though most people celebrate the holidays as nothing more than a 3-day fiesta, there are some who cling to the old beliefs that on the days of the dead, the departed, actually do come back to life. Many cities have parades with elaborately costumed figures and beautifully decorated floats. All Souls Day is a day of picnics attended by the adults of the community. Huge platters of food and drink are set out on long, makeshift tables in the middle of the graveyards. As the eating and drinking continues, the happy partygoers sometimes actually believe their relatives have jumped out of the grave and are joining in on the lively party. Jose and I attended one such fiesta in a cemetery just outside of the city. After about 3 hours of eating and drinking, mostly drinking, Jose wandered over to a grassy knoll and fell asleep. Enjoying the relaxing afternoon of food and friendly chatter, I was deep into a conversation with a heavy-set middle-aged man in a white suit, who said he had the most unusual job in the city, that of crypt keeper. That is a bit of an odd occupation, but certainly not the most unusual, I countered. Correct, senor, except that the crypt I keep is the most extraordinary place of its kind, not just in our city, but perhaps the whole world. It is the tomb of the Cajas de Cárcel, the prison boxes. Surely it isn't the only prison in Mexico. It's not a prison, senor, I said. Not prison, but prison boxes, in a tomb, deep under the ground. Curious, I pressed him for more information and he explained that the people buried in the main cemetery had bodies and coffins, as would be expected, but there were no bodies in his crypt, only ashes. Cremation is not allowed by the leaders of our religion, but in the cases of notorious killers, we hang them, and then burn their bodies to dust. The padres turn a blind eye to the cremation, because they are certain the murderers went straight to hell as soon as their necks snapped. We take the pile of 1 pound or 2 of ashes remaining, and lock it inside a wooden container we call a prison box, a caja de cárcel. We believe that as long as the murderers remain secured inside the caja, they can never rise to commit another gruesome slaying. Over time, we have developed a kind of a museum of horror from these boxes. Part of my job is to add a new box to the collection on those occasions when we capture and execute a new murderer. The main part of my work is ensuring the inhuman monsters do not escape their wooden cells during the days of the dead. It is time now for me to inspect the tomb, he said. Perhaps you would like to accompany me and see it for yourself? I said I would, and we set off on foot, walking to the perimeter of the cemetery, and then continuing on for more than a mile, until we reached the edge of a steep, grassy hillside. In the middle of the mound was a great arched door of heavy oak, surrounded by massive granite blocks. This is it, senor, that door is the portal to the tomb of the Cajas de Cárcel, the prison boxes. Inside are the remains of the most deadly and violent killers our nation has ever seen. Do you dare to enter? You lead, I'll follow, I replied. Producing a large iron key, he unlocked the immense brown door and tried to open it. It's too heavy, senor. It seems to have sagged on its hinges since I was here last and is partly stuck in the earth. Can you help me? Together, we tugged at the enormous russet portal, and gradually got it open wide enough to go inside. A blast of cold air hit me instantly. It was at least 30 degrees cooler than outside. The crypt keeper located and lit a lamp and we began walking along a dank hallway of earthen walls, shored up occasionally by time-worn timbers. Sloping gradually downwards, the corridor continued for what I'd guessed to be a quarter of a mile until we reached a windowless metal door. Producing a second key, the crypt keeper unlocked it and we entered a frosty tomb. After the keeper lit several lamps, I saw that the center of the room contained a table and 4 chairs as well as a 4-drawer file cabinet. A typewriter and a thick stack of paper sat atop the table. From floor to ceiling, the walls were lined with wooden pigeonhole shelving, painted white. The individual storage spaces were about 2 feet square. Most of the nests were empty, but about 1 of every 5 contained a wooden box, about 1 foot wide and deep and 6 inches high. Each container had a name plate identifying the killer inside. Part of my job is to type out the information sheets that accompany each box but one. May I pick up one of the cases? Certainly, examine any one you like, but I must warn you, no abra, do not open it. I picked up the box closest to me. It was surprisingly heavy, about the weight of a bag of sugar from the supermarket. The ashes inside the box were those of a killer named Fernando de Calva. Do you know anything about this man? I wondered. That's de Calva, replied the crypt keeper, and it's interesting that you picked up that one to look at. Because he's the only one who does not really belong here. Why doesn't he belong here? I wondered. It's a long story, reported the crypt keeper, but let's just say, it's because he was not hanged, like all the others. He died in the crash of a car. I can't say why, but the box of DeCalva's ashes intrigued me. I held onto it tightly as I looked at some of the other cubby holes. Each prison box was accompanied by a typewritten biography sheet, pasted onto an 8 by 12 inch square of cardboard. In chilling matter-of-fact detail, the horrid crimes of each murderer were listed. Browsing through them was similar to viewing a car crash. You don't want to watch, but you can't stop yourself. There's no information sheet for the box that I'm carrying. He said, "Senor, I told you, that's DeCalva. He doesn't belong here. If you're interested in that box, why don't you buy it from me? I don't want him here." "Why?" I asked. "Isn't he a killer like all the others?" "He is a killer, but not like others," the keeper responded. "For 1,000 pesos, that is 100 American dollars, you can have DeCalvo." Without hesitation, I drew 5 20s from my wallet, and bought DeCalvo on the spot. When I returned home, I put the prison box on my desk in my home office. I was fixated on that box. I looked at it for hours. I held it like a pet cat, walked around with it, and even talked to it. I don't know how, or why, but the box seemed to have power over me. As the days passed, I thought about opening the container, despite the warning, "No abra, do not open." Finally, one sleepless night, I resolved to unlock it, and see what was inside. Pulling down all my shades, I turned off every light in the house, save for the one at my desk. I locked all my windows and doors. I even pushed furniture up against the door of my home office, so that no one could easily break in, or no thing could easily break out. Taking the box from its shelf, I cradled it like a newborn child, and brought it to my desk. I sat down, put the box on the surface, and stared at it for several minutes, before grasping it, unlocking it, and opening it. I looked inside and saw ashes. Only ashes. 5.5 pounds of ashes. I don't know what I was expecting, a pair of glowing eyes, and a ghostly face, perhaps. A plume of smoke, morphing into some sort of a demon maybe? Just ashes, exactly what was supposed to be inside. Disappointed, and suddenly very tired, I went to bed, and immediately fell asleep. Sleep. Sound, peaceful, sleep. Sleep. Restful sleep. Until I was awakened by the monster from the box. Yes. That night I had my first dream, no. My first nightmare. Though I shut the container and locked it the next morning, it was too late. The monster had left his caja de cárcel, his prison box, and was roaming free. Dr. Starling listened to Jim Wilkes tell his story and rubbed his head in a circular motion, as if moving his hand over the tiny shafts of his hair, trimmed in a buzz cut, might stimulate a thought or a solution to his patient's problem. Finally he spoke. "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a ghost hunter. I hold a medical degree from Harvard in Boston, and a degree in psychology from Bowdoin in Maine, a school whose graduates include President Franklin Pierce, the writers Longfellow and Hawthorne, as well as the researcher Alfred Kinsey, but nothing I've ever studied has prepared me for anything like this. I don't believe in ashes swirling around in the air, and taking the form of a killer monster. I don't believe people can rise up on the Day of the Dead, and have a picnic lunch, in the cemetery. I do not believe in any of this. And yet, it appears that is exactly what we are dealing with. Somehow, by means and ways unknown, you've unleashed a demon from hell, and it's going to be up to you and me to send it back. How are we going to do it?" Jim Wilkes wondered. "I don't know yet, Jim. Where's the prison box now? It must still be back at my house on my desk where I left it, unless someone has gone in and moved it. The first thing we have to do is get that box and somehow coax the demon back inside. Once we have it safely locked up back in its box, that should be the end of it. But Doc, how can I do anything while I'm locked up inside of Taunton State? That's going to change tomorrow, Jim. I'm releasing you effective at 9 in the morning. You can't do that. Crazy old Dr. Mall will chain me to the walls of the basement, and you'll be lucky to get a job as a medical assistant at a village in the Yukon. Don't be so quick to judge Dr. Mall. I grant you that he's an oddball, Jim, but he's a very skilled psychologist, as well as a fine hospital administrator. Under his watch there have been vast improvements here, as you should be able to attest. We haven't done too badly by you. I meant no offense, Doc. And yes, I've been treated very well. I wouldn't have survived on the outside. Even though the creature isn't after me personally, I would probably be dead now, if not for you and this institution. The other thing is this, Jim, said Dr. Starling, I'm in charge now. Dr. Mall has accepted an immediate appointment to a government commission studying ways to improve the nation's mental hospitals, and he recommended me as his successor. Congratulations, Marty, that's fantastic. I mean, congratulations, Director Starling. No, I'm still Doc or Marty to you. Now, as to your release, it's all set. You're leaving in the morning after breakfast, and I'm going with you. I want to be there when you retrieve the box. Somehow we'll figure this thing out. By the way, are you still in touch with your Mexican friend Jose? Sure, Marty, we talk on the phone every now and then. Although, since I've been in here I haven't been able to call him. I think you should phone him right now, Jim. Tell him everything that's happened and put him on the trail of DeKalva's identity, as well as that of the person who sold you the prison box. We can't call right now, Marty, because I don't remember the number. We'll have to look it up in the morning when we get to my house. It's written down in my personal phone directory. Okay, we'll wait on that, but what we can do today is contact some of the larger newspapers in Mexico and see if we can get some information on Fernando DeKalva. You know a few things about him, don't you? You're right, Doc. The metal plate on his prison box says that he was born in 1904. It also says he died in 1951, in a car crash, according to the crypt keeper. He also said that DeKalva was a killer, but he didn't belong with the other murderers. That puzzles me, Jim. Did he mean that he didn't want DeKalva's box in his crypt, because he wasn't hanged like the rest of the criminals in the tomb? Or was there another reason? By supper time, with the assistance of several members of the clerical staff, Jim Wilkes and Dr. Starling had gathered a comprehensive biography of a man the Mexican press said, he only killed those who needed killing. The reporters said that all his murders were committed under what he thought was divine guidance, according to the rule of retaliation. An article in a Mexico City daily, dated October 29, 1951 stated, Mexico's most celebrated self-styled vigilante, Fernando DeKalva, has died of injuries suffered after losing control of his new 1951 Volkswagen Beetle, during a high-speed police chase on this city's Autopista Grand Highway, at 4 this morning. Police claim that DeKalva hid in a delivery truck, and sneaked into the Rio Gordo maximum security prison, and somehow got to the cell, where multiple murderer Gil Esteban, Mendez, Alvarez, Hernandez was serving a life sentence. The authorities allege that DeKalva slit the throat of Hernandez, and then cut his heart out, in a horrific and symbolic reenactment of the very same method Hernandez used, when he murdered 15 women, 7 men, and 4 children over a 5-year period, before his capture last year. Police say DeKalva fled the prison after the killing, and jumped into his Volkswagen, which was in the staff parking lot, next to the warden's car. The vehicle crashed into a guardrail when DeKalva failed to negotiate the hairpin turn at Herquilla Curve. Well, Doc, after gathering all the information we did, I see now why the crypt keeper said DeKalva didn't belong with the others in the tomb. He was a kind of a folk hero. When he killed, he only killed killers. He personally exterminated at least 12 of Mexico's worst mass murderers. Yes, that's it, Jim. He only killed convicted murderers who somehow escaped the hangman's noose. That would explain why the monster of your dreams, who must somehow be the spirit of Fernando DeKalva, murdered both Cannibal and Poison Ivy. Further, it sheds light on why he killed them in similar fashion to the way they murdered their victims. I get it, Doc. DeKalva explained everything in a letter he sent to the newspapers in 1949. He said, I do not kill out of enjoyment or a propensity towards violence, but because of the rule of retaliation as set down in the Holy Bible. The rule of retaliation is, an eye for an eye. I take no pleasure in murder, other than the satisfaction of knowing I've done a service for the people of the country, that the authorities are unwilling or unable to do. That's all we can do today, Jim. Get a good night's rest and meet me here in my office at 7:30 in the morning. We'll have breakfast together in the staff dining room and then drive to your house. Happy at the prospect of freedom after his long confinement in the asylum, Jim Wilkes slept soundly that night and was not visited by the monster from the prison box. In the morning after breakfast, a member of the hospital's security team drove Dr. Starling and Jim Wilkes to an elegant 3-story home, with a widow's walk on the roof, near the Taunton Green. After instructing the driver to wait in the car, Dr. Starling followed Jim into his house. "I've got to get some windows open, Marty. After being empty so long, this place has definitely got that vacant house smell." "Probably a little bit, Jim, but it's not too bad. It is a beautiful house, by the way. Have you owned it long?" "My wife and I bought it just after we married, more than 30 years ago. It's an old sea captain's home. Though we're 20 miles from the ocean, the Taunton River made this city a thriving seaport in the days of sailing ships. Big schooners could sail all the way from Fall River and New Bedford right up to my back steps, which are less than 100 yards from the river." After getting fresh air circulating through the ground floor rooms, Jim Wilkes led Dr. Starling to his home office, a large room in the rear of the home overlooking the Taunton River. "What a delightful room this is, Jim. The front of your house looks out on the city with all its cars and foot traffic, yet here in the back of your home with all the trees and the fast-moving river, it's just like being in the country. It always was very comfortable here, until the nightmares." "Speaking of that," said the doctor, "let's have a look at the prison box. It's in the closet behind my desk. I'll bring it out." The two men examined the box, but there was nothing remarkable about it, other than the fact that it contained the ashes of a killer of serial killers. Jim Wilkes called Jose in Agua Prieta and filled him in on everything that happened and asked him to track down the man who sold him the box. "I don't have to track him down, Jim, I know him well. I'll go speak with him and get all the details about Fernando de Calva, and I'll get back to you later. We already know about de Calva. What we need to know is how to get him back in his box and how to return him to the underground tomb. I'll have the information very shortly, don't worry. I'll call you right after I talk to the crypt keeper." Dr. Starling sent his driver back to the hospital to retrieve copies of any new information that might have come in on de Calva. While waiting for him to return, the doctor and Jim Wilkes re-examined all of the information they had gathered the day before. They found nothing new in the second reading, but when the security officer returned, he informed them. "We've got something, Dr. Starling, autopsy results and a disposition of body report." Eagerly the doctor took the typewritten sheets and rapidly scanned them. "The autopsy report doesn't really tell us anything. No alcohol or drugs were in his system at the time of the fatal car accident. All of his internal organs were in good shape. He was by all appearances a very healthy 47-year-old man." "What about the disposition of the body, Doc?" "That report rounds out the picture a little bit, Jim. It says that there was a fight over who would get the corpse. There were no known relatives, but there was a tug-of-war between at least 3 factions wanting the body. A local judge ruled that it was to be given to the keeper of tomb of the Cajas de Carcel, for cremation and storage. And that's where I found him." "Say, Doc, do they mention the name of the crypt keeper in the—" Jim Wilkes was cut off in mid-sentence by the ringing of his telephone. "Jim, this is Jose. I've spoken with Alfredo Bernardo, the crypt keeper of the tomb here in Agua Prieta. Though he professed disbelief when I told him what's been happening, he was quick to tell me the local legend of the prison boxes. He said that the boxes must remain undisturbed, in his underground vault. He said that if a box is removed from the crypt, and is unlocked and opened, in the light of day, the ashes can rise up in a swirling mass, that morphs into a grotesque beast, that will prey upon the world. Bernardo states that to sustain its life, the beast must return to its ashes for 2 hours every day, before the morning twilight. He said you must wait until 30 minutes before the morning twilight, and then lock the box exactly 30 seconds before actual twilight. The creature will be trapped inside. As long as the box remains secured, the monster cannot escape. When I told him you planned to return the box, he grew very frightened, and he absolutely refuses to allow the box of Fernando de Calva to be returned to the place where you got it. The good news is that I talked to the museo/museum in Mexico City. It turns out they tried to obtain de Calva's remains after his fatal car crash, but were denied. They will pay you $25,000 in American money for the prison box. Great work, Jose. We'll trap the beast in the box tomorrow morning. Right now, I'm going to wire you money so that you can grab the first plane out. Come here to Massachusetts. Visit for a day or 2 and then you can take de Calva to the museum. Okay, Jim, after I hang up I'll go straight to the airport. I'll see you by supper time. I'd like to have a New England boiled dinner tonight. Can this be arranged? Yes, Jose, I think that Dr. Starling and I will treat you to Taunton's finest dining this evening in Benjamin's restaurant on Lake Winnicott. Oh, one more thing, Jose. Before you go to the airport, call the museum and tell them you'll be there in a few days with the prison box of DeKalva. And tell them to make the check out to you, my friend. The money is yours. Within a week, Jose delivered the locked container of ashes and collected the $25,000. The museum dedicated a whole room to an exhibit of Fernando DeKalva, his prison box, and his exploits. Jim Wilkes wondered if Jose would put a big dent in the money by buying a few hundred cases of tequila. He happily learned later, from Jose himself, that instead of liquor, he bought a travel agency, gave up drinking, and was rapidly turning his new venture into the most successful business of its type in all of the state of Sonora. As for Jim Wilkes, he never had another nightmare or nocturnal visit from ghosts or monsters. He did not lose his taste for travel and adventure, however, as noted by his friend Dr. Marty Starling one day when they spoke on the phone. "I'm glad to hear the progress you're making at Taunton State, Marty. They sure are lucky to have you as the director. I can't make it for golf this week. I'm going on a little trip." "Where are you going this time, Jim, and how long will you be gone?" "It's kind of open-ended, Marty. I'm planning on staying 2 months, but it could be longer. I'm going to Egypt." "Oh no," groaned Dr. Starling. "Listen, Marty, go if you must, but don't venture inside any pyramids, and if you do, don't buy any strange box that might have a deranged mummy inside. I don't think I could survive a mummy running amok in the asylum." "We'll see. Bye, Marty."
Under Dr. Martin Starling's leadership, the asylum entered a brief golden age. For as long as he remained the director, the basement torture chambers remained closed. He banned controversial and painful treatments like ice pick lobotomies, brain-damaging electrical shock therapy, chaining patients to walls, and more. The nocturnal killings of the ghostly wall walker ceased. Never again would a patient be murdered by the beast with eyes of fire and claws of steel. But the weirdness of the asylum remained, through the remainder of the 1950s, and continues right up to the present day. Patients and staff alike say that there still are strange cold spots in various places, especially near the elevators, and the entrances to the basement. A temperature difference of 20 degrees or more was reported by a recent director, who wrote in his notebook, "I went to my office this morning and everything seemed normal until I walked by the upholstered chairs in front of my desk. As soon as I got near the first chair, I felt a sudden chill. I shuddered from the cold, and quickly walked past the second chair. Less than a foot from the chair, the temperature was normal. An unexplained cold, damp blanket of air hovered around the front of the desk and remained there for hours. Though under rules initiated by Dr. Starling, the tortures in the basement were banned, and the area was largely abandoned, patients and staff often report they still hear blood-curdling screams rising up through the floors from the dingy cellar, horrible cries issuing from the throats of people wide awake and staring at an ice pick being hammered through their eye socket into their brain. When orderlies go to investigate the screams, they occasionally report that as they try to descend the cellar stairs, they are stopped by some invisible force. When they are finally able to get into the basement, they find weird writing on the walls, unintelligible scrawling, perhaps made by alien beings. Under a full moon, the moaning of the patients is so loud, it can be heard by fishermen on the shores of Hockomock Swamp Pond, 5 miles away, in the neighboring town of Rainham. In the cemetery a few hundred yards from the main building, the remains of dead patients are buried. Most of the graves are unmarked and few of occupants died from natural causes. Most were victims of ice picks, electroshocks, or other ancient barbarisms carried over from the 16th and 17th centuries. A local newspaper reporter doing a feature article on the asylum recently sat down near one of the tombstones to record his thoughts on his tablet. As he wrote about the eerie quality of the neglected burial grounds housing the remains of tortured souls, he felt a pair of cold hands grasp him by the shoulders. Thinking a watchman wished to speak to him, he turned around, but there was no one there. A slight patch of mist hung in the air just a foot in front of his eyes. From the little cloud, a barely audible voice whispered a single command: "Leave this place." now. He did. Inside the Freeman wing on the 3rd floor where Cannibal once resided, inmates often report seeing a faint, transparent figure walk right through the wall. It's a woman whose face is fully encased in an iron mask with holes for eyes but none for a mouth. Where the lips would be, is a stenciled image of a skull and bones across. Sometimes the apparition speaks, as reported by a patient named Sarah Goodall, who said, "The creature oozed through the wall, her face shrouded in an iron mask. The only things visible were her white eyeballs and a Jolly Roger painted on the mask, where her mouth should have been. She walked silently to my bed, where I lay frozen in terror. She told me not to be afraid. She was bringing me a treat. It looked like a jar of pickles. She held it out in front of her chest with both hands and asked me if I wanted some. She opened the jar and removed one of the pickles. But my stomach turned as I realized it was not a regular pickle, it was a pickled human finger. She held it towards my face. Then the horrid creature spoke to me. 'I can't eat it,' moaned the monster, 'they've shut me up in an iron mask and I can only eat through a straw. I'm so hungry for a finger, or a nice, fat toe,' she moaned. 'I'll share it. Here, you eat it.' Another spectral lady makes regular appearances in the Freeman building, though she is a much more benign and attractive ghost than Cannibal. Often seen during the hours of the graveyard shift, the beautiful woman wears the crisp white uniform of a nurse. She appears not as a ghost or apparition but as solid as anyone else. She doesn't walk through walls or scuttle around on the ceiling like a fly, but is every bit as evil and frightening as Cannibal. She is none other than Poison Ivy herself, and she has been sighted more than 24 times. The patients who encounter her give the same story, without variation. I was having a bad day. My medications weren't helping me. I just felt like giving up, and then I heard a knock on my door. A smiling pretty nurse entered and said she had a surprise for me. She quickly affixed a secondary drip below my primary medication bag and pulled back my sheet. She crawled into bed with me and started hugging me. I started screaming so loud and kicking, that I scared her away, and that's the only reason I'm still alive today. Impossible? Is everything we have spoken of simply an imaginary tale? Yes. Absolutely. Bill Russo's book, Hauntin Taunton, although partly based on real people and events, is a work of fiction, and yet many of the tales related here have been circulating in New England for decades. The accounts of horror and of the undead center around the real-life Taunton State Hospital, an insane asylum the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been trying to kill for several decades, without success. Government funds have been stopped, buildings have been closed, burned down, or abandoned, yet the hospital refuses to die. The Kirkbride building where James Wilkes was housed, was officially shut down in 1975. Many of the other elaborate structures were abandoned, and left on their own, to be slowly whittled down, by the elements. Others were sold off piece by piece to collectors, film studios, and other institutions. In 1999 the stately dome of the administration building collapsed from decades of neglect. In 2006 a suspicious fire claimed several other buildings of the historic complex. In 2009 the government ordered demolition of even more structures. So this is the end of our story, dear friends, but not the end of the asylum. The hospital has officially been shuttered a dozen times. And yet, if you drive on Route 95 to Massachusetts, veer off on Route 495 and then hop on Route 44 to the city of Taunton, you can motor right by the ancient grounds of the state lunatic asylum. Of the more than 40 structures on the site when it was built, only a handful are left, and they are supposed to be closed, but somehow, like the legends of the ghosts who walk the hallways, and fly walk the ceilings, the Taunton Asylum lives on. After trying to destroy it for 20 years, the state of Massachusetts doled out $19 million from 1990 to 2000 to improve the remaining pieces of the campus. Then in 2012, the elected officials decided once again to shutter the entire hospital. A rapid reversal of that decision resuscitated the invisible beating heart of Taunton State, and now in the 2020s, there are still 48 psychiatric beds remaining, as well as a drug rehab program, and a center for troubled teens, run by the Department of Youth Services. Oh yes, I almost forgot. There's also a greenhouse on the lovely grounds of the asylum. It's run by patients. A wide variety of flowers, potted plants, garden vegetables, and other edibles, are offered for sale to the general public. Most of the workers in the program are trustees, and they will treat you very well. Be careful though, of one worker that I've heard about. She's not there all the time, but if she's around, you can't miss her. She sells pickles in clear, glass jars. Her face is covered with a mask made of iron, with a white decal of the skull and bones across, where the mouth should be. Stop in any time, to say hello, or to buy a pickled finger, or a toe. And so with episode 39, the conclusion of Hauntin Taunton, we come to the end of season 1, of Short Story Theatre, featuring the writings of Bill Russo. You can see Bill, in the feature documentary, The Bridgewater Triangle, now playing on Amazon Prime, or hear about him in season 1, episode 7 of Aaron Manker's award-winning series, Law. Bill Russo's ebooks and paperbacks are available on all major sites, such as Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Apple. He also has some 24 short stories and books featured for free, on Smashwords. And so, to the thousands of people who have listened to our series, we extend our gratitude, for your support. Short Story Theatre is a copyrighted feature of CCA Media. Speaking for our author, Bill, and the entire cast, this is Basil Nightingale saying thanks for listening and please, come back again real soon. Won't you?